Welcome back to the Wicked Psychology Live Hangout stream where we are continuing the Adam Montgomery case. Today we are going to look at a couple officers taking the stand and then a female acquaintance, a maintenance worker, and a driver/caretaker that interacted with Kayla and Harmony. The officer that we're going to start with today, he's going to go over a work order for their apartment that they did live in at one point. We learned recently that at some point they lived in a vehicle, but they also lived in an apartment at some point, which he's going to address and kind of go over the work order that was sent in about the apartment being really cold and it also having a weird smell. And these are important because we know that he was freezing Harmony and trying to keep her cold after the crime, and there was alleged instances of it being a smelly home as well. The other officer is going to go over like the car as well as the home, because allegedly Adam kept Harmony in the attic. So maybe they're going to probably go over some of the seeping fluids that came out onto the ceiling. And apparently the second officer we're going to listen to is the one that participated in cutting out the ceiling for evidence reasons as well after the fact. So super, super gruesome for anyone just joining. Quickly, the overarching story is that Adam allegedly harmed his daughter Harmony, who was a 5-year-old. She was reported missing in 2021 by her biological mother, Crystal, and her mother had lost custody due to substance use. And Crystal had claimed she had not seen her daughter since 2019, so 2 years until she reported her missing. Again, Adam is still not in court by choice, and the judge is allowing that. So let's start with the first officer. And again, this one's going to be the one that goes over the work order, which is stating that the apartment was cold and smelly.
Mr. Riley, how are you presently employed?
Employed, but I work for myself. I'm a consultant for, I do some work for some civil law firms.
Is that, what kind of work is that?
Interviewing.
Investigations?
No investigations, just interviews. I just do like a forensic type interview.
Do you do anything else currently?
I still work at the police department part-time.
And let's talk about that. When you say you still work at the police department part-time, what police department is that?
Manchester.
And can you just walk the jurors through your experience working at the Manchester Police Department?
So you want me to start with my first police department and then move into Manchester, or just Manchester?
Manchester.
So Manchester, I went there in 2007, and I spent, I think, 7.5 years in Manchester in patrol, doing all kinds of different assignments, bike patrol, motorcycles, stuff like that. And then I went into the juvenile division as a school resource officer for a couple of years. And then I spent the remaining almost 8 years as a juvenile detective.
What kind of things did you do as a patrol officer?
Respond to urgent calls, anything from traffic stops to urgent, could be bank robberies, anything, whatever is needed at the time.
And is it pretty typical for officers that start at the Manchester Police Department to work patrol for some period of time?
Yes, it is.
You mentioned going into the juvenile division and working as a school resource officer.
I did.
How long specifically did you do that for?
2.5 years. If I recall, I don't really know exact. I think it was maybe 2.25 years, 2.5 years, somewhere around there.
And you also mentioned eventually becoming a detective in the juvenile division.
I did.
What did you do? What were your assignments and duties in that role?
Investigating crimes either against or by juveniles.
And how long were you a detective with that division?
I was just shy of 10 years, by a few months.
Earlier you mentioned prior law enforcement experience, prior to the Manchester Police Department. Can you tell the jurors what that is?
I worked at Hooksett Police Department. That's where I was originally hired in 2004. I worked there from 2004 to 2007. Then I transferred over to Manchester.
Mr. Riley, did you graduate from the New Hampshire Police Academy?
I did.
What year did you graduate?
The 135th Academy, and it was in 2004.
I want to switch gears, Officer Riley. Or, I'm sorry, Mr. Riley.
I'm still an officer, so it's okay.
Okay. Can you, were you assigned duties in your capacity as a law enforcement officer in the investigation of the missing child, Harmony Montgomery?
I was.
And can you just describe generally your role and involvement on that case?
It began with everybody pretty much in the division, because when it first came in, it was fast paced. They kind of grabbed everybody they could to work on it. So the assignments in the beginning were kind of just, they'd have like a morning meeting and they would decide, you're doing this today. There was nothing specific. And then it morphed into, I was assigned monitoring jail calls, jail mail, jail messages. I was involved in some interviews. I mean, I didn't have like a specific assignment. Whatever was needed, they just assigned it to us, and we ran with it.
Did you say it was all hands on deck?
It was in the beginning, yes.
I mentioned a missing persons investigation. Did that change at some point during the course of your involvement?
It did. Yeah.
What did it change to?
It changed to more of a homicide investigation.
Do you recall when your involvement began on the Harmony Montgomery case?
I believe it was the 2 days after Christmas, so it would have been the 12/27 of 2021, if I recall correctly.
At some point in the investigation, did you and the officers with the Manchester Police Department receive information pertaining to the Families in Transition Shelter, FIT shelter here in town?
We did.
And what led you? What information did you receive that led you to that shelter?
I wasn't part of there was an interview that was conducted and information was obtained that maybe that the child was placed in that apartment for a period of time.
You mentioned an interview being conducted. Was that with Kayla Montgomery?
It was.
During your time with the Manchester Police Department, were you tasked with processing that room?
I was.
When did you process that room?
I believe that was June 4th of 2022, if I recall correctly.
Can you describe your response to the Families in Transition Shelter that day?
We were told to go out there and we were going to complete a search of the apartment. I mean, the crime scene van was involved. It wasn't my case, so I didn't really have any of the planning. I was just kind of, let's go. You're going to help process the scene, and we obviously went out there.
So you mentioned receiving information pertinent to your investigation that may be at the Families in Transition Shelter. Did you, subsequent to that, after getting that information, did you provide a subpoena for documents to the Families in Transition Shelter?
I did.
If I can approach, Your Honor.
Yes, you may.
Work order number A11010. What is the start date of that document?
2/5 of 2020.
What's your understanding of what this document is?
It's a work order for the FIT.
And can you read the description on that work order?
It says general other, really cold in units 2 and 5. Come check the thermostat, slight odor when the heat is on. Done on 2/5 of 20.
And what was the unit number associated with that?
Unit 2.
And we'll talk about this later, but are you familiar with the general layout of the rooms in the FIT shelter?
Yes.
And let's move to work order number A1107. Which unit number is associated with that work order?
Unit 1.
And that's your understanding of where the defendant is staying.
Correct.
And can you read the general description?
General other, weird smell coming from vents in the unit. Come check it out.
What was the date associated with?
February 21st of 2020.
And you mentioned earlier that the defendant left that room on February 20th.
Correct.
So this is the day after he left.
Correct.
When they approach her. Dr. Riley, I'm handing you what's been marked and previously published as States Exhibits 31 through 34, and what's been marked for identification as States Exhibits 35 through 39 for identification. Can you take a look at each of those in turn? I'm going to take these records back. Can you take a look at each of those in turn and describe what's depicted on those images?
This is are you going to put them on the screen too? You want me to
I'm going to put them on the screen,
okay.
but if you can just talk to me about
okay.
not show the drawings.
Okay, so the first picture is a picture of the front of the Families in Transition, which I'm going to call Fit or Ease. That's the front door. It's really just the front of the building. And the second is second picture is
Hold on. Attorney Knowles, him saying second picture, I need him to identify what he's looking at by the exhibit number, please.
Review the number that's depicted at the bottom.
isn't this number right here?
Yep.
Okay. So number 30 is the front of the building. Number 31 is inside the building, looking at doors, apartments 1 and 2. Number 32 is looking inside Unit 1. It's a picture inside the room. Number 33 is another picture inside the room, specifically of the ceiling. Number 34 is a picture of the vent, our area of interest, one of them. Number 35 is a picture above the ceiling, looking at the an area of interest that I'm sure we're going to talk about shortly. Number 36 is I had placed a measuring tape to kind of show the size of the area of our interest up there. And then number 37 is a picture of the ceiling was cut and it was on the floor before they wrapped it.
How about 30? 39, and 39.
So 38 is another picture of the ceiling when it was on the floor. It was placed on butcher paper. 39A is a picture after I cut the ceiling, just the hole and picture of the room. And then 39B is another picture of the ceiling where I cut out the ceiling.
And do you recognize the items?
I do.
Are they accurate representations of what you saw that day?
They are.
At this point, I need to strike the ID from States Exhibits 35 through 39B.
Not 30 through 34, just 35 through 39B.
30 through 34 have been previously published.
I see, okay. Any objection? All right, the ID is stricken, they're entered as full exhibits.
Detective Riley, when you arrived at the Families in Transition Shelter, were you accompanied by anyone that day?
Many people, yes.
And you mentioned remembering going there. The image that I've just depicted behind you, identified as State's Exhibit 30. Do you recognize that location?
That's the front of FIT, yes.
And the individuals that accompanied you that day, do you remember their names?
Some of them.
Okay.
Detective Stewart Coswick, Rayhill, Deputy Duffs, William Duffs is his name. Tufts, I'm sorry, Tufts. Detective Dunleavy. There was a couple supervisors there, I think.
So the individuals that you just mentioned, the majority of them work for the Manchester Police Department.
Yes, all but one. Yes.
Are you aware of where Deputy Tufts that you mentioned?
U.S. Marshals.
Mr. Riley, what did you do when you arrived at the Families in Transition Shelter, FIT shelter? You mentioned that you did some cutting as you were reviewing those images. Can you tell the jurors what you actually did?
So, you want me to start from my first observation when I walked in the room, or just the actual cutting?
Let's talk about walking into the room first. If you'll look at the image that's on the screen behind you, State's Exhibit 31. What are we looking at there?
Unit 1 and 2. The doors.
Unit 1. I don't know that that's much better, but
This is 01.
so Unit 1 is on the left, and where's Unit 2?
Right here, on the right.
So they're adjoining rooms.
Yes. They're polar opposites from each other. I'm pretty sure they're exactly opposite, like this. The walls are right into.
I'm sorry, Your Honor.
Oh, yeah. Sir, you just need to speak into the microphone
sorry.
when you're speaking,
Yep,
so that everyone can hear you. I know it's hard, but
Yep.
And did you make any impressions when you, did you enter the room when you arrived?
I did.
And the image that's behind you, you said you recognized.
That's Unit 1.
And was that the layout that day?
It was.
Are you aware of whether or not they're allowed to move furniture at the Families in Transition?
I have no idea.
Tenants?
Not aware.
But that's what you saw when you arrived.
Yes.
And again, can you remind us why you were going there that day?
There was information developed in the investigation that there's a potential that the missing child was placed above the ceiling in this unit.
And was there an access point to that ceiling?
There was.
And do you see it in the image there?
I do. It's the vent at the top.
That vent?
That's correct.
There's a number next to that vent. Can you read that to the jurors?
Number 1.
When you arrived in that room, when you actually walked in, did you make any impression? Did you have any impressions?
I did.
Can you tell the jurors what those impressions were?
There was an odor. I could smell something. I didn't know what it was when I first entered the room, but I could tell there was an odor in the room.
Okay. Any other impressions, Detective?
I mean, it looked lived in. Kind of a normal residence, I guess.
Did you do anything with that vent while you were there?
I did.
What did you do with it?
I removed the vent. I pushed it up into the ceiling and moved it to the side.
Was there anything securing that vent when you moved it?
I don't believe there's anything securing the vent to the outside frame. The vent kind of just sits into the outside frame. But the vent was connected to some tubing up top by a zip tie.
Did you remove that zip tie at some point?
Yes, I did after.
What did you observe did you look into the opening that you created?
I did.
What did you observe when you?
As soon as I removed the cover, I knew I could smell what I know is decomposition. I could smell a dead body. What I believed to be a dead body at the time, or it smelled like decomposition is the best way to describe it.
What is decomposition?
When a person dies, the body starts to degrade, I guess is the best word. It's a smell that you just won't forget.
And can you just tell the jurors what your experience is with that smell?
I mean, I've been to many many death scenes, many autopsies. I've smelled it many times.
Did you make any other observations when you looked into that vent?
I did.
And what were those?
I could see at first that there was, it looked like a stain right close to the edge of the vent. That correct? And I also noted that you can see the sheetrock dust. And I'm sorry if you can't hear me. This is it's hard to crank my neck around to see this. The sheetrock dust you could tell had been altered. Like you could see in the back, it's all fresh sheetrock dust, probably from when the place was constructed. And this over here appeared to have been something had been in that area.
Mr. Riley, if you don't mind just standing up and actually pointing to that area of dusting that you're discussing.
Right here. You can see here, this is different. The composition is very different between the two. It was clear that something was here and not placed over in this area.
And the staining that you mentioned, where is that, if you could point it out on the screen?
I'm sorry, say that again?
You mentioned seeing staining.
Yes.
Where is that? At some point, did you attempt to measure what you were observing in that picture?
To the best, yes, I did.
And is that it?
It is.
About 16 inches across?
Approximately. It varied in size.
Let's talk about what you did next after you observed this area of interest. What did you do?
We, as a team, we obviously decided that we needed to take this, so we cut it. We used just an old school sheetrock serrated knife, and I cut the sheetrock until I got to the metal studs, and then we had to use a reciprocating saw to cut the metal studs you can see in the picture.
Did you take any precautions while you were working on the ceiling?
When I was up in there, I had gloves on, but I didn't go up into the ceiling. You couldn't because it would collapse. So I didn't really have, other than putting the measuring there, I didn't really have any direct involvement with like the stain. When I started cutting, we changed gloves every time we changed, like when we took the vent down, we changed gloves. When we started cutting, I changed gloves. But I was below the ceiling at this point. I was cutting from below. I wasn't up in the ceiling with it.
Were you wearing a hazmat suit that day, or
I was not.
How about a mask?
I was not.
What were your working conditions like while you were doing this?
It was hot.
It was hot.
It was hot. Yeah, it was very hot.
Sweating?
I was.
How long did it take? You said you removed a portion of the ceiling. How long did that take?
I would say the actual cutting was probably maybe an hour. The whole time we were up there was or dealing with that, maybe 3 hours. I don't recall the exact times, but it was within a couple hours, I think, probably, from the time we removed the vent till the time we actually took the ceiling down.
And so you mentioned actually taking the ceiling down. Is that what it looked like?
It is.
And again, that staining, did it become more apparent once you removed it from the dark area it was in?
It did, because of the lighting.
Do you recall whether that item was given an evidence number?
I know it was. It wasn't tagged by me. My primary focus was just getting it down, and then it was handed off to the team that packaged it and tagged it. I am helping assisting packaging later, but initially they put it and covered it in butcher paper.
Do you recall having it labeled MER 3D?
That sounds right. Yes.
MER, those are initials this jury heard. Do you know whose initials those are?
Yeah, Detective Rayhill.
That's Max Rayhill.
Correct.
You mentioned butcher paper.
Yes.
Do you see that in this image?
Yes, you can see it through the hole. It's sitting on top of butcher paper.
At what point during your processing did you actually place that butcher paper down?
I didn't place it down. The team that was there did. I was standing on. The ceiling. I'm not very tall, so I had to stand on a platform to cut. So once we got to the point that I could cut the last metal, we had to have other team members hold it. And then once it was detached from the ceiling, I got out of the way and it was put down on a piece of paper.
Do you know what the purpose was of putting it on paper?
Preserve any evidence that's on it or in it.
Would that be including the items that fell during the cutting?
Correct.
Are you aware of how this portion of the ceiling was handled once you removed it?
I know it was placed in the crime scene van, and then I believe I helped carry it up into the evidence room. And then I didn't have anything to do with it for a period of time after that.
Were you aware of low points in the ceiling while you were processing it?
I don't know what do you mean by low points.
Was it completely level, or do you know?
On the outside, looking up, it was flat. Inside, there was a bunch of different channels because of the metal framing.
I want to talk about how large the ceiling was relative to the overall room size. You documented it, is that right?
I did.
And is that accurate in comparison?
It is.
How did you actually get up there to cut this out?
We used that bed frame.
No ladder?
No. Well, we had a ladder there as well because we had to have multiple people, but I stood on that bed frame, and if I recall, I may have stepped off to the ladder. And I know there was some talk about having other people jump in because it was hot that day and it was a lot of manual cutting, but I continued, and just because I was already covered in sheetrock dust, there was no sense getting anybody else.
Mr. Riley, I want to switch gears. At some point, in your official capacity as an officer with the Manchester Police Department, did you travel to Florida?
I did.
Can you explain that to the jurors, why you did that?
They're trying to figure out how to get this to a lab to test it for DNA or try to figure out what was on this staining. And I know that I didn't myself, but another detective had done some work on this prior to me getting it. I offered to drive it down to Florida because they had it was too big. You couldn't fit it in a plane. It turned into a mess. So I offered to drive it, and they said sure. So I went and rented a car at the airport, and I know that the size, I remember it being 44 inches wide, and we had to find a vehicle that it would fit in. So we rented a car, and it fit, and I drove straight to Deerfield Park, Florida. I think it's DNA Labs is the name of the
DNA Labs International.
Yes, correct.
And when you say we drove it, who if anyone were you accompanied with?
Detective Bergeron Rosa.
And so you drove it from Manchester to Florida.
We did.
And do you recall the date of that?
I believe that was July 20th of 2022, if I recall correctly.
Did you stay in Florida, or did you come back to New Hampshire?
We stayed overnight. We drove straight through. We didn't sleep on the way down. We drove the whole way.
In your career as an officer, have you ever done something like that, such a long trip?
Personally, yes, many times. As a police officer, no.
Did you eventually come back with that item, that portion of the ceiling?
We did.
And when you say we did, was that with Adam Bergeron Rosa, or was that another officer?
That was with Detective Heil. Yes. Just a timing thing, so they decided him to go.
And how did you come back with the item?
We flew down, we rented a car, or it was a Ford Expedition, if I remember correctly, and we came back with that amongst many, many other items. It wasn't just that item, but the vehicle was completely full.
Between the time that you took possession of the portion of the ceiling and the time that you got to the lab in Florida, were you able to maintain and secure possession of that item at all times?
At all times, yes.
And once you obtained it back from the lab in Florida and drove it back to New Hampshire, were you able to contain it, to secure it at all times?
We were.
If I can have just a moment.
Oh. I'll be able to use this now. It was just hard to turn around.
Doesn't have to go high. Good morning.
Good morning.
I'm Caroline Smith, and I do not have very many questions, but you talked about having many different duties in this case, right?
Correct.
And one of those duties was to talk with Kayla Montgomery.
Yes.
And do you recall when you were speaking with Kayla Montgomery?
I would say either the 30th of December or the I think 12/30 of 2021 is. I may be wrong, but that's kind of in my head.
Okay. Was that at Fit Shelter or a recorded interview?
Both. So I talked to her 2 different times, so that may be off by a day. The first time I believe I talked to her. We were at Fit, outside of Fit.
And the second time?
Was at the station.
Okay. And that was a recorded interview?
Correct.
And that was prior to her arrest?
Correct.
Okay. Did you advise her that she could have an attorney?
Yes.
And did you tell her that she didn't have to speak? You wanted to talk to her about missing Harmony?
Yes. I don't know if I did or Detective Dunleavy, but she was advised that it was a voluntary interview. Yes.
Okay. And you talked for a while.
Yeah. Yes, it was.
And
very
then at
lengthy.
some point, I think you all gave her a chance to be alone and write down maybe her thoughts.
Correct.
In case she didn't want to tell you all directly, maybe she wanted to write it down and pull her thoughts together.
That is correct.
Right?
Yes.
And the essence is that and you gave her a fair amount of time, right?
Yes.
And when you came back and looked at the note, it essentially ended the interview.
It did.
Okay. Now another random duty. I don't mean to call it random.
Okay.
You just
It
were
was.
jumping here, there, and everywhere,
Very
right?
random.
And
Okay.
one of the things that you did was, to collect something from the House of Correction that Kayla wrote.
Correct.
Show you what's been marked as Exhibit G. Do you recognize this document?
It's okay to remove it out of here.
Yeah, you have it.
Okay. I do recognize it.
What is it?
It's a note that she had. That was. I think they were doing a cell search, if I recall correctly, and they found this in her room,
Okay.
in her cell. Sorry.
Okay. And so essentially, the police department, someone discovered that this note had been seized,
Yes.
and you were assigned to go and take the note.
Correct.
And did you talk to the COs and sort of document everything about how that was obtained?
They had their own report. They provided me with their inside report.
Okay. And do you recall when that was?
I don't. I'd have to see the report. I don't remember the date. I'm guessing early January. I don't recall the date. I have to see it.
If I showed you a copy of her report, would that help refresh
It would.
your
It would.
recollection?
It would. Just too many dates to try to
I know.
wrap my head around them. So it was January 31st of 2022.
Okay, and excuse me. From the time that you obtained that note, did you put it into evidence and secure it and all that stuff?
I did.
Okay. And just very, very quickly, I want to talk about securing evidence and why you do it, okay?
Yes.
And why you have these initials and all these bags and stuff. You can't do anything about evidence and what happens and who touches it and how it might get transferred and all that stuff until you collect it, right?
Correct.
If you want to preserve something in the exact condition that you want it to be in, you can't affect what happened before, right?
That's correct.
So all you can do is take what you have available, and from that moment you can preserve it.
Correct.
Any changes an item might have gone through, any transfer of evidence back and forth, you can't affect that.
I cannot.
But from the moment that you collect it, you're going to make sure that there's virtually no changes in that item, right?
Correct.
And one of the ways that you do it is to collect it and put it in a container.
Correct.
Okay. It might be something like an evidence bag,
Could be.
and It might be something more. It might be an envelope if it's just a document.
Could be. Yes.
And in that one, you put it in that clear evidence bag.
I believe this was their evidence bag, but I don't recall if it's ours or theirs. This doesn't look like our bag, but it may have been. We have many different types, so I don't recall if this was mine or theirs.
Okay.
It probably was ours because I believe I took copies of this, so I believe this would be our bag. I may be mistaken.
And that's a plastic bag.
It is.
So you try and collect it and preserve it in the container appropriate for that evidence.
Sure.
For instance, you wouldn't put the tile in plastic because that might cause
Condensation.
and affect the condition of the item within there, right?
Sure. Yes.
So you're not so worried about condensation with a piece of paper.
Correct.
And then when you collect it, the jury has seen items open and it has red tape. This one is sealed just as a product of the bag it's contained in, right?
Correct.
But other evidence items might have some tape on it.
Sure.
And the reason for the tape is that you are securing the evidence and letting anybody know once this is taped that nothing is going to change that item unless we can track it, right?
Sure.
For instance, if evidence has been taped with Manchester Police Department tape, then something might be sent to the lab for checking, right?
Sure.
And the lab would have to open an item to test an item, right?
Correct.
And so when the lab opens whatever packaging that you have retained a piece of evidence in, they actually don't open from the top, right?
I don't do that. I have no idea how they open it.
Sustained.
Okay. So one of the purposes of the different color tapes is to be able to track when an item of evidence has been opened from its packaging.
I use whatever color tape is available. I don't use it for tracking. I use it to seal the item. That's the only reason I do it.
Okay, so if somebody comes along later and opens the item, they have to reseal it to indicate that it's been gone in and then keep the tracking. You don't do that?
Overruled.
I don't reopen evidence. I don't know that I guess it's possible it could happen, but I wouldn't necessarily use a different color tape if I did.
Okay.
I would cut it in a different area. I would tape it and then initial it after.
Okay. So you would cut it in a different area so that somebody knows that it has been opened from the original sealing.
Sure.
And then you would tape it in that second area, right?
Sure.
And you would do a report that documented the fact that for whatever reason you had to go into the bag that contained the item of evidence.
Sure.
So that anybody that wants to know, has there been any changes to this item of evidence, we can track anybody who has had access to
It's reasonable, yes.
Okay. But there's nothing you can do about anything before you collect an item of evidence.
Correct.
Okay. Thank you, Detective Officer.
Yes, officer.
Officer Riley, you were asked about interviewing Kayla Montgomery, and you mentioned that interview ended.
It did.
Can you tell the jurors why that interview ended?
She said that she didn't want to talk anymore and she wanted to get an attorney.
She asked for a lawyer.
She did.
Note G, Exhibit G, that note that was collected. Are you sure about who collected it, who put it in that plastic bag?
I think I would have, because I believe I took photocopies. I don't recall if I did photocopies or they gave me photocopies. That's why I'm unsure whether I put it in that bag or someone else.
When you say they may have given you photocopies, you also said it may have been their bags. Who is they?
The
They that you're referring
Valley
to?
Street Jail, Hillsborough County House of Corrections.
Note G also talks about her wanting to speak to her attorney, right?
Correct.
You were asked about the handling of evidence, packaging. You were asked about cross-contamination. Do you know what cross-contamination is?
Yes.
Can you tell the jurors what cross-contamination is?
Well, it depends on the item of evidence, but I mean, cross-contamination could be anything from blood to DNA to. I'm not sure what.
Specifically with respect, and let me back up. You were asked about tiles. Did you collect tiles from that fit shelter?
Tiles. They were collected. Yes, I didn't physically collect them, but yes, they were collected.
You collected the ceiling.
Yes.
And this wasn't ceiling tiles. This was the actual ceiling.
This was drywall. Yes.
Do you remember what the drywall was connected to?
It was connected to metal studs, metal framing.
Metal framing.
Yes.
So that's what you collected.
Yes.
After that collection, did you volunteer a DNA sample?
If needed, yes, I did.
Why was that?
Because it was sweating so much, it was nearly impossible to try to measure and take pictures of that stain. I mean, it was just the sweat was running down my face, so I wasn't sure if I could have sweat and dropped any in that opening when I was up in there.
Is that pretty standard when you're collecting items of evidentiary value, of potential evidentiary value, that you volunteer such a thing?
Yes.
And that's for many detectives, right?
Yes.
I don't have any additional questions. Thank you.
Sorry. The prosecutor asked about how the December 31, 2021 interview ended, and with that note, and you said that Kayla asked for an attorney?
Is that the recorded interview?
Yeah.
Yes, she said it. She wrote in the note that she wanted an attorney. Yes.
Okay, but the note contained a lot more than I want an attorney. The note contained what she said
Yeah,
the story was.
yes.
That Adam had driven off with Harmony and she... Approach. So the note that essentially entered the interview included that she wanted a lawyer, right?
Correct.
But it also included that she didn't know anything more. Go talk to Adam. He wouldn't talk to her.
Yes.
Sorry about my misreference to the ceiling tiles.
So it's okay.
And again, that volunteer of the DNA sample is a lot of stuff can affect an item, and you want to make sure if there's an item of evidence that is revealing information that nobody understands, that they can check your DNA, compare, and see maybe it's that versus something else.
Correct.
If there's a question about perhaps DNA being found.
Correct.
Okay. And by the way, note G that you collected from the COs. Remember that?
Yes.
Okay. That was not the note we're talking about in the interview. That was the note where Kayla had listed her desires in talking to the AGs.
Correct.
Okay. Thank you. Let me step down.
We are going to now listen to an officer that inspected Adam's vehicle and found a substantial amount of mold and buildup in the vehicle from moisture buildup. And he also has knowledge of the home as well, like this officer.
Miss Harmony Montgomery.
Yes.
And can you just generally describe your role and participation in that case?
Majority of my role was helping coordinate evidence processing, liaison between the state lab and private labs, processing of several vehicles for evidence, and also some other various items that were processed.
Did you coordinate with a lab in Florida during your participation?
I did.
And when did your involvement begin in this matter?
The beginning of January, we had some initial tips that were phoned in that we went and investigated in Haverhill, Mass. And then a vehicle was processed middle to the end of January.
You mentioned the beginning of January. Do you remember what year that was?
2022.
You mentioned tips, and I want to discuss that. Are you aware of a tip line related to the disappearance of Harmony Montgomery?
Yes, I am.
Had you worked in your career as a law enforcement officer, as a detective, had you worked on a case involving a tip line before?
I've had tips come in for some of my own cases and financial crimes.
I guess I'm referring to a specified tip line associated with this case.
I did not field the tips or the calls. I was just asked to follow up on them.
You were directed to follow up on them?
Correct.
And you said one of those was in, did you say Haverhill, Mass?
Yes.
You mentioned processing vehicles during your participation in this case. Was one of those vehicles a blue Audi AS4 bearing New Hampshire registration number 4569334?
I can tell you that it was an Audi AS4 blue. I can't tell you the exact plate without referencing my notes.
Your Honor, if I may, excuse me, if I may approach.
Yes.
Detective Lemmy, I'm handing you what's been previously published as State's Exhibit 22 for identification.
Yep. I do recognize that vehicle. It's the one that I processed here at Manchester Police Department, New Hampshire plate 4569334.
And that's the Audi process.
Yes.
Because of false positives, Detective Lemmy, when you see something that's presumptively positive, what do you do with it?
Well, presumptive positive is just an indicator that it could have hemoglobin, so we treat everything as if it has the chance to have that. In this particular case, the items that tested positive were sent up to the New Hampshire State Lab for processing.
And I guess let me ask this, do you take additional swabs to send up to the New Hampshire State Lab?
Depending on the item, I believe in this case, the items were small enough that we were able to send the whole item up to the lab.
On this particular vehicle, where did you use the hemosticks?
In the back seat, there was a car part just randomly sitting on the seat, and it was plastic with car insulation, like sound and deadening insulation on it. And there were a couple of spots on that looked suspicious that I tested.
How would you describe, how would you describe the condition of the vehicle when you examined it?
So the vehicle had what appeared to be, and we didn't test it, but it smelled like it, appeared to have a thick layer of mold all throughout the inside of the passenger compartment. And
you previously mentioned working on that vehicle for several days. Did you take any precautions because of that?
We wore Tyvek suits, and also not wanting to breathe in mold, we wore face masks.
Of the items that were pulled from that vehicle, did you send any off to the state laboratory?
I did.
And do you remember which items you submitted?
The the first three items that we did initially were, I believe, JP 55, which was the car part, JP 120, and JP 122, which were carpeted floor mats.
Do you recall submitting item JP 119, 153, 195, 224, 251, 216, 225 to the lab as well?
So those were sent several days or a week later when we processed outside of the vehicle area. And I actually used a different testing method for that one.
What was that testing method?
I transitioned from the hemistick to Kastle-Meyer, which is a similar type of test. It's processing using reagents to also identify hemoglobin. But the Kastle-Meyer historically has been known to provide less false positives. So I transitioned to that and processed approximately 37 items that had come out of the car. And out of that, I believe 6 gave me a presumptive positive and 1 was a false positive.
When you say that 1 was a false positive, how did you determine that?
So, and not to get too technical, but the way the test works is you drop 3 drops on a swab. So the swab is used to collect the evidence off of the item. Sometimes it's a dry swab, sometimes it's a drop that's been dipped in sterile water. You rub it on the evidence item, then you drop a couple of drops of what's called phenolphthalein onto the swab. If the swab immediately reacts with just those initial drops, that's considered a false positive, because until you add a couple of drops of hydrogen peroxide, 3%, onto the item, it shouldn't react at all. So in one of the cases, it reacted as soon as I dropped the first couple of phenolphthalein drops onto it.
Excuse me. You mentioned this green color when you're using hemisticks.
Mm-hmm.
Is there a color associated with the Kastle-Meyer test?
Yes, Kastle-Meyer will turn a bright pink.
And is there a different level of pink that you're looking for, or is it something else?
It's not so much the level with the Kastle-Meyer test as it is the time frame of how long it takes to react. So if it reacts immediately, it's a stronger indicator that it's a true positive.
Can you still have false positives with, well,
Okay.
I think you mentioned that you did in this case.
Yeah, you can still have false positives with the Kastle-Meyer. So it's just a presumptive test that gives you an indication. Let's look further at this.
So, Detective, I want to switch gears. I want to discuss processing of a portion of a ceiling. Are you familiar with what I'm referring to?
I am.
Okay. And can you just generally tell the jurors what your involvement was with that?
Certainly. So I was aware in my conversations with the team that a large section of ceiling had been gathered. I was also aware that that piece of evidence had been sent up to the state lab for processing. They processed it for different items and did not come back with enough evidence to support there being DNA on the item. I was told by members of the team that they sent a couple of these pieces of the ceiling down to the private lab we mentioned earlier, DNA labs in Florida, to have tested, and they came back as testing positive for blood.
Point, Judge. And say,
Sustained.
I'll redirect, Judge. So I don't want you to get into the specific testing of any of the items. But just, what you've explained that.
Okay.
Your Honor, if I may approach.
Yes.
I'm showing the defense what's been marked. So you mentioned being tasked with processing this item. Are you familiar with the item number associated with it?
MER 3D,
And when did your processing occur?
July 15th, 2022.
Specifically, what was the item that you were tasked with processing?
The MER 3D was a large section of ceiling tile, which was sheetrock with some metal strips on the top of it.
And so those images that I asked you to look at, I've put one up on the screen behind you. Can you explain to the jurors what they're looking at?
Yep, this is the whole piece of evidence as I examined it that day. And you're essentially looking at a center opening that I believe is where a vent was, but I wasn't present when they removed this item. And the metal pieces you see are the strips on the top part of the ceiling. You wouldn't see this from underneath it, but that's what the sheetrock would have been mounted up to.
And when you say you weren't present for the removal, is that from the location that it was taken from?
Correct.
The shelter, the fit shelter?
Correct.
And so what does this image depict?
This image is evidence. I requested that the item be, that I examine the item because we didn't, well, I won't speak to the lab results, but I requested that I review the item to see if I could find any potential traces of evidence that we should be looking for. So the evidence technicians brought this out for a viewing. I viewed the item. I noticed things on the item that made me suspicious that there were additional areas that we should be testing.
Detective Lemmy, let me ask you this. When you received the item from the laboratory, was it packaged up?
Yes. So it was, this is how I found it at evidence. The evidence technicians brought it out. They opened it, and this is how I found it.
And so I've added the image to the screen behind you. That states Exhibit 108. And I want to discuss the items that you packaged or that you removed. You mentioned the railing. Did you remove any other items?
We separated several of the pieces of the sheetrock from the main unit. There was one large piece that I ended up keeping intact, but then we separated off parts that didn't appear to be important as far as any potential evidence items on it.
And you mentioned taking the photos. Did you give those photos specific evidence numbers?
Yes.
Did you provide a description along with each of those evidence numbers?
I did.
And so can you explain to the jury what they're looking at here?
So and I'll point up here if you can't see, let me know, but I just put a tape measure on it just to see what the distance was between the metal grids. On here, there's also a couple of handwritten letters written right onto the sheetrock. That was not done by me. I presumed that was done by the state lab. And there's what appears to be a dark stain in the center of this piece of sheetrock.
And so the letters that you're referring to, if you can just read them for the jurors.
Far left is the letter A next to that cutout. B, cutout. C and D are in the stain area.
And when you received this item back from the state crime lab, or the state forensic laboratory rather, that had already been done. That's not something that you did during your processing.
That's correct.
So this item is MER 3D RL4. Can you describe what the jurors are seeing in this picture?
RL4 is the metal grid that runs across here. It was sitting on top of that dark stain, and it's lifted up on edge, so flipped up on its side. And there's also dark staining on the metal itself.
And when you say that dark staining, did that become an area of potential evidentiary value during your processing?
Yes, it did.
And I just want to show the jurors where that item, MER 3D RL4, came from. Do you see it depicted on the sketch you drew?
So RL4 is the section that runs completely across the larger piece. And in this smaller box, it's right here.
And what's depicted in this image?
This is still part of MER 3D RL4. It's the other end of the piece, and it's also showing dark staining running underneath that grid.
I want to move on to RL14. What's depicted in this image?
RL14 ended up being a piece of the sheetrock that we separated from the main piece. It's separated approximately at where this line is. And this is the dark stain on the sheetrock itself that had been under RL4.
And I want to look at where that came from in relation to the portion of the ceiling that you processed. Can you just point that out on your sketch?
Yeah. So RL14 is this section right about to here, over to about this line that extends from here.
And what does this image depict?
RL16, so this line right here would have been where RL4, that long strip that runs across, and then RL16 is another section of sheetrock that we separated from the main piece of interest, and approximately at where that thin line is going across, that's where we separated that piece from.
During your processing of MER 3D, did you become aware of low points in or warps essentially in the drywall and framing area?
I can't tell by looking at it the way it's laying on our workstations if the item would have been angled when it was sitting on the ceiling itself. But what I can tell from looking at this, where there was a dark stain in that center, and then you see a much darker stain running along that railing, it would appear that the fluid that would have made that stain would have run along that, which is not uncommon for fluid to track an object that's attached to it.
Did the fluid, the staining, appear to be absorbed into the drywall?
It appeared to be absorbed into the drywall more in that center area where it was a lighter color. And then it didn't, it was much heavier consistency along where the rail had been.
And what is depicted in this item, this image?
So this is still part of where RL4 was, sitting on top of it. And this is just a shot from the side of the piece to show that there's depth to the staining itself.
At the time of your processing, Detective Lammy, were you aware of other testing that had been conducted on this item at the lab?
I was.
Laboratory. And can you tell the jurors what that is?
So those two square cutouts that you saw on the sheetrock itself where the paper was missing, those two had been cut out and sent down to the lab as part of the state's processing of the item. And the results came back.
You're saying?
Sustained.
Not asking you for the results,
Okay.
but you were aware of other testing that had been conducted.
Correct.
Were you aware of fingerprint testing, latent print testing conducted on that item?
I hadn't reviewed results of that, but I was aware that some had been attempted.
What does this image depict?
It's just another more direct on from the side of where RL4 had been sitting, the kind of a thick layer of staining.
And again, this item.
Again, this is RL4 going across, and then this section that goes up, that's where RL3 railing had been.
In this image.
And this just continues on. This is where RL3 was. RL2 was down in this area. That's where the initial stain had been, and then RL1 would have been up in this area.
Are you aware of whether there was a vent involved in the processing of this item?
I was aware just from the team, but I had not viewed it.
Are you aware of where the opening to that vent would have been?
Yes, the opening of the vent would have been in this area. There was metal grids coming out this way in the initial photos.
You mentioned the Kastle-Meyer testing. Did you swab? Did you test? Did you use the Kastle-Meyer test
I did.
during your processing? And what's depicted in the image?
So again, this is the part of RL4 that we were looking at predominantly. It's showing my sample swab, and it's showing a bright pink result. So essentially, a swab was used, it was dipped in a sterile water, it was rubbed on the staining itself in that area, and then the Kastle-Meyer test was applied to it. And once the the couple of drops of the hydrogen peroxide were applied to it, it was an immediate pink.
And can you remind the jurors what that immediate pink, what it told you?
The faster it reacts, the more likelihood it is that it's a positive versus a false positive.
Detective Lemmy, based on your processing of MER 3D overall, the portion of the ceiling that you processed, did you submit any of those items to DNA Labs International?
I did.
And what of those items did you submit?
That whole piece of sheetrock that remained after those other few that we looked at were removed was sent down as one item. The rails that came off, RL1, RL2, RL3, and RL4, those were packaged separately and sent down as well.
And let's talk about those rails, Detective Lemmy. When you removed the rails from the drywall, did you have any observations?
So other than the darker staining like this that was present under a couple of them, once RL4, which was the long piece, and over the part that was more heavily stained, as soon as that piece came up off the sheetrock, there was a noticeable foul smell.
And what was that smell associated with?
I would speculate that it's from that stain itself.
Detective Lemmy, I want to switch gears and I want to talk about the ceiling itself. We have portions of it here, and I'm going to ask that you remove, and you have your evidence custodian with you, technician with you. I'm going to ask that you remove them from their packaging to show to the jury. And so, Your Honor, I would just ask that this witness be permitted to move freely with the evidence technician.
Yes, you may. Go ahead.
All right, so at this point, this officer stands up and goes to the other side of the courtroom to help open some packages and things like that of evidence. I cut from here to the next sequence of his testimony. Honestly, there was not much discussion, and it was very hard to hear since no one was near a microphone at this point. But essentially, it was just a bunch of rapper sounds, and they were just unpacking evidence. So yes, so I stopped there. So if I'm not mistaken, let's skip ahead. Okay, so this is the friend of Adam. She was a significant other of possibly someone that Adam had spoken to on Facebook. Seems to be a pattern in his life that he makes friends through Facebook, reaches out to them through Facebook, and tends to ask them for assistance with his car and things like that. We've seen that pattern a few times thus far. This female friend allegedly put her name on a hotel room that Adam had stayed in. So he was using other people, not just for help with his cars, but also putting their name on things like a hotel that he stayed in when he had Harmony's body. And we'll hear later from someone else that there was also someone else that he used to put their name on a U-Haul that they used to transport Harmony's body as well. So he was really, spreading this out to more distant friends that he wasn't as close with to cover for him so they wouldn't trace it back to him, or so he was hoping.
If you'd like some water, you
Thank you.
can make yourself comfortable. Ms. Bedard, can you start by telling this jury your name and spelling your last name for the record?
Yep, my name's Brittany, Britney. My last name's Bedard, Bedard.
And Ms. Bedard, what city and state do you live in?
I currently live in Daytona Beach, Florida.
Daytona Beach?
Yes.
Prior to that, where did you reside?
I lived in Auburn, New Hampshire.
And how long did you live in Auburn, New Hampshire?
I grew up there. I've spent the last 10 years, minus 3 years, in Florida. And, yeah.
Ms. Bedard, what do you do for a living?
I currently, I'm opening a business. I work for UPS, as part-time, but I work from home.
And what's the highest level of education you have?
I've graduated college a few times.
Okay. Are you familiar with an individual named Travis Beach?
I am.
How do you know Mr. Beach?
I dated him for a little while when I came back home 3 years ago.
3 years ago?
Yeah, I came back from Florida. I moved back up here 3 years ago, and then I left a year and a half ago.
So I want to turn your attention to early March of 2020.
Mm-hmm.
Back in early March of 2020, were you dating an individual named Travis Beach?
I was.
And back then, during early March of 2020, did you have an occasion to stay at the Econo Lodge here in town?
I did.
And do you remember the specific dates that you stayed at the Econo Lodge?
I don't know. I don't remember the exact dates. Yes, you may.
And I've just showed the defense what's been marked for identification as States Exhibit 64. And I'm handing you what's been marked as States Exhibit 64 for identification. Can you take a look at that and just let me know?
Yeah.
So having taken a look at that, do you recall with any specificity the dates that you stayed at the Econo Lodge?
It says on the March 3rd to the 4th.
And does that refresh your recollection as to when you stayed there?
I remember staying there, but it doesn't. It says it, so I guess it's there.
Okay. When you say it says it, do you recognize any of the names on that list?
Yeah, my name is there. I remember getting the room. I stayed there quite a few times, so I.
Did you in fact get 2 rooms during that period?
I don't remember getting 2 rooms. I remember them having another room, but I don't remember getting both rooms.
I'm going to take this back for you, Mr. Large. When you say you remember them having another room, when you say them, who are you referring to?
I remember Adam and Kayla. It was shortly after I met them that they were staying there too. I don't recall that because it was so long ago. The whole situation on why their room was in my name, but yeah.
Do you remember putting their room in your name?
Vaguely.
Okay.
I don't remember the situation surrounding it, but vaguely.
Okay. Miss Bedard, let me ask you this. You mentioned something like Adam. Who is that?
It was Travis's friend.
You know Adam's last
Montgomery.
And you mentioned someone named Kayla. You know her well.
Montgomery.
Back in early March of 2020, did you have an occasion to visit them at their home?
I did.
So, Ms. Bedard, I'm handing you, it's been marked for identification as States Exhibit 65, or 55 rather, and 56. Can you take a look at those each in turn and just look up when you're done?
Yes, I remember those.
And you're smiling.
I do, because he was the cutest little boy ever.
Okay, let me ask you this. The images that are depicted on those exhibits, what are they from?
They are from their apartment on Union Street.
Okay, and when you say their apartment?
Adam and Kayla's apartment.
Okay. And is there an individual depicted in the exhibit?
Yes. His name is Declan, I believe.
Declan.
I don't remember. We were there me and Travis were there for a short period of time, and I love little kids because it reminds me of my children. So I sat and played with them the whole time. So. And
do you see a phone in that photograph?
I do.
Do you recognize it?
It looks like one of my old phones.
Okay. The child that's depicted, did you take that photograph?
I did.
Okay. And was that a fair and accurate representation of that photo on your phone?
Yes.
And how about the second photo?
It is.
And that's referring to States Exhibit 56 for the record. Also fair and accurate representation?
Yes.
Your Honor, the state moves to strike that deed. States Exhibits 55 and 56 in Marcusville.
Any objection?
No objection.
The ID is stricken. They are entered as full exhibits. They may be published to the jury.
So, Ms. Bedard, you said that you recall taking this photo. And I believe you said it was at their apartment on Union Street?
Yes.
Did that photo actually record the
The
time and date?
I don't know if it recorded the time, but I know it had. Okay, it must have. Yeah.
So, specifically referring to States Exhibit 55, did the photo that you took record the specific time and date?
Yes, it did.
Taken? And what was that?
It was Sunday, March 1st at 6:02 p.m.
March 1st?
Yes.
Okay. And referring to States Exhibit 56, did that record the location that you took that photo from?
Yes, it did.
Okay. And what was the location?
It just says Union. It doesn't give the exact address. It just says Union Street.
Is there an intersection?
Yeah, Orange Street and Union Street.
I'm going to take those back from you. Thank you. So you mentioned you recalled being at their apartment briefly. Is that correct? So I want to go back to this stay of yours at the Econo Lodge. You said that you may have recalled putting a room in your name for them?
Vaguely.
So do you recall putting whose name the room in yourself? Do you recall the defendant Adam Montgomery also being at the Econo Lodge?
Yes.
And during that period of time, you stayed at the Econo Lodge, did you become aware of a U-Haul?
Yes.
Can you tell the jurors what your familiarity is with the U-Haul?
There was a U-Haul that was rented in someone's name, but and I don't remember exactly why. They needed a card on file. I'm assuming because they asked if I could use my card to pay for it.
And when you say they asked, who?
It was Adam and the person, I don't remember what his name is, that they ended up putting the U-Haul's name in.
Okay, so you remember another individual being there.
Yes.
Okay, but you don't recall that individual's name.
No, I do not.
It wasn't Travis Beach.
No, it was not.
So during that time when you were staying in the Econo Lodge, it sounds like you recall putting at least one of the rooms in your name. Is that right?
Yes. Travis and I had gotten a room.
And during that period, did you lose your ID?
Yes. Which happens quite a bit, apparently. That was when I first moved back, and I had just gotten it, and it got stolen from me at the DMV.
So, was that recovered?
No, it was not.
Did you put the U-Haul in your name? Do you recall?
No, I did not.
And I think you mentioned this other individual. You don't know their name.
I do not remember what his name was.
No further questions.
Good afternoon.
My name is Amy Brooks, and I represent this Montgomery lawsuit. On direct, you were asked about the Econo Lodge, and you were staying there with Travis.
Yep.
And Adam and David were staying in a separate room.
Yes. They were on the floor below us, I believe.
Before you checked into the Econo Lodge, you were at the Comfort Inn.
No, I've never stayed at the Comfort Inn. They have too high of a security deposit.
Okay, but you were at the Comfort Inn in an effort to try to check in there, right?
Yes, and that's when I didn't have the money for the deposit, and so we were leaving to go to another hotel.
While at the Comfort Inn, you saw Kayla in the parking lot?
Kayla and Adam, yes.
And with Kayla, you saw her with a CMC bag, correct?
I seen this stroller, and I remember, I don't know if it was exactly a CMC bag. I remember there being a tannish, whitish bag in between the seat of the two boys.
And Kayla was in possession of the stroller where the two boys were?
Yes.
Yes. Miss Bedard, I'm handing you what has been marked States 52. Mm-hmm. Does this look at all familiar to you?
It does. I mean, from the top, it looked like it had something in it. So, I mean, the bag was set down in between the stroller, so you could only see like the top part of it. But yes. Yes. Well, not. It was in the stroller, and she was pushing the stroller.
In the stroller that Kayla was pushing?
Yes.
You did not see the bag in Adam's possession?
No.
Thank you, Miss Bedard.
Just one question. You said you saw that stroller in the parking lot?
Yeah, they were out. I want to say they were outside when we walked outside to leave to go to the Econo Lodge. Kayla and Adam.
Two boys?
Yes.
Together?
Yes.
All right, may I step down?
I love that she admitted to not staying elsewhere due to other hotels having more security. I was not expecting that. All right, so we are going to now listen to a maintenance worker for the apartment building that Adam lived in.
Sir, is that your phone that just?
Yeah,
Okay, I'm
it's
going to ask
turning
you
it
to
off
turn it
when
off,
it's-
please.
Thank you.
Sir,
Yep.
just turn your phone off.
Yep.
And I'll ask you to remove your glasses, please.
Okay, thank you.
All right, thank you, Mr. Cloutier. As we're being recorded here today, would you please state your full name, spell both your first and your last name for the record, okay?
Dennis Timothy Cloutier, DennisCloutier.
And Mr. Cloutier, what town do you reside in?
Allstead, New Hampshire.
How long have you lived in New Hampshire?
Pretty much my whole life, but I moved away for a few years.
Okay. And what do you do for work?
I'm a maintenance man.
How long have you been doing maintenance?
25 years.
25 years. Let me ask you, are you familiar with an address called 644 Union Street?
Yes.
How are you familiar with that address? Could you tell the jury?
I contract for maintenance from the landlord, so I take care of it.
And when we talk about contract for maintenance, what kind of work do you do for them?
Paint the apartments when they're empty, fix things when they're broken.
What about when you say fix things that you've broken? Just thinking about all my contractors that I might have. Do you do plumbing?
Yeah, basic.
Electrical?
Yeah, outlets and such. Nothing more than that.
Okay. Are there sort of lights repair? So there's a hole in the wall or something like that?
Exactly.
Locks?
Locks.
Screen and doors?
Screen and doors.
Okay. And what about flooring?
Flooring, yeah.
Okay. And let me ask you, with regards to, I apologize. Also, do you do set up an apartment for when a new tenant's going to come in, or do you clean out apartments when old tenants move out?
Both.
You do both?
Yes.
All right. And how long have you been doing that at 644 Union Street?
2007.
Okay.
That's when the landlord purchased it.
And you're still doing it to this day?
Yep. Worked there this morning.
All right. I want to know, are you familiar with anybody by the name of Tara Hilbert at that address?
She doesn't live at that address, but she lives around the corner in another building that same landlord owns.
Okay. And do you ever interact with her with regards to doing these setups, clean outs, painting, things like that?
Yeah, every now and then we need her to transfer keys or drop off paperwork for a new tenant. If they're going to look at an apartment and no one's around, she'll open it for us, that sort of thing.
Okay. If I could approach the...
Yes, you may.
I'm going to show you from our state exhibit 136 and 137 for identification purposes only. Let me show you states 136 first. Do you recognize that photo?
I do.
What do you recognize that to be a photo of?
The corner of Orange and Union Street.
And the building you told me about a moment ago, 644 Union Street, is that shown in that photo?
It is.
Is it labeled in that?
It is.
Yeah. And what does the label look like? Just tell me, please.
What, the red little icon?
The red icon. Okay. And let me also show you States Exhibit 137, again for identification purposes only. Do you recognize that image?
Same property.
Same property?
Correct.
I believe you said before that Ms. Hilbert was living in an adjacent property?
Correct.
Okay.
She lives in this building.
Okay. And by that, you're pointing to a building on
137 Orange Street.
137. Okay.
Correct.
And with regards to these two particular photos, other than the fact that obviously they got a little red sticker down here on the bottom right, and to come off of Google, other than that, do they look to be accurate for the building that you service? And that
Correct. Yes.
Your Honor, that's the identification of these 51 states.
All right, the ID is stricken. They're entered as full exhibits.
I want to ask you specifically about what other individuals this photo. And that is showing States Exhibit 101. Do you recognize this person?
Adam Montgomery.
Have you interacted with Adam Montgomery before?
I have.
And did you ever service a unit that he was staying in? at 644 Union Street?
I did.
Well, when you met him, did you meet him in person or over the phone?
In person in his apartment.
And how many times would you say? More than once?
I think I was in there twice.
Twice. Okay. Let me ask you, did you ever have a maintenance request for that particular property back on February 27th of 2020?
I did.
Okay. And when you have a maintenance request, what sort of paperwork gets generated for when you do service on a unit?
Well, the way it works is everything is pretty much a verbal agreement. And then when the job is performed, we hand the landlord a bill. And there's a record of that. It's all invoices. Yes. They're triple carbon. You know, the white, the pink, and the yellow. Yes. That's it. Yep. Yep. Correct.
Let's go ahead and show you State's Exhibit 70 for identification purposes only. Do you recognize that?
I do.
All right. What kind of document is that?
That's one of my invoices.
When you said before, you got the white and the white, pink, green?
Yeah, white, pink, and yellow.
White, pink, yellow. So it's the bottom copy.
Correct.
Okay. And for that particular invoice, you just told us a moment ago about doing some work on February 27th. Is that the invoice from that day?
It is.
Okay. And other than the fact that there's a red sticker on it, any changes to that from when you remember turning that copy in?
Not at all.
Your Honor, I'd ask that the identification be stricken from State's Exhibit 70, please.
An objection?
No objection.
All right, the ID is stricken. It's entered as a full exhibit. It may be published to the jury if you wish.
Thank you. Mr. I want to ask you just a couple of quick questions about the job that you did on this day. Specifically, from going through, and the other opportunity to look at this more later on, what kind of work did you do for that? I'm going to leave it there in case you have to refer to it, but what kind of work did you do at that point?
Oh, the guy called about his tub not draining. I knocked on his door. I met him in the kitchen, went around to the bathroom, noticed that the overflow plate where the drain lever is was missing a screw, turned sideways. And he said the drain did not drain.
Right.
So I removed the rest of it, went down to the truck, got a snake, snaked out the drain, discovered that he had dislodged the actual plunger that hooks to the lever. So that was stuck down in the drain. So I removed that completely, went back to the truck, grabbed a brand new plate that doesn't have a lever hookup, and he just didn't get a lever.
Okay.
You see what I mean? And I just put a blank plate on that so it could at least overflow water. And that was that. So I snaked the drain and replaced the plate.
Sounds like it. Would you say that that was a fairly easy repair that day?
Yeah, it was in and out of there in maybe 35 minutes.
Okay. While you were there, did you see anybody else inside the apartment?
Yes, I think the woman, Kayla.
Okay.
And some children were on the couch.
Okay. And the children, you said that they were on the couch. Let me ask you, the size of the bathroom in that particular apartment, how big are we talking, or how
Really
small?
small.
Really small.
Really small.
Okay.
Like a galley bathroom.
Okay. I see what you mean. So if I come through the door of the bathroom,
if someone's standing behind the door of the bathroom, it won't open.
Okay.
It's a small bathroom.
Right. The plate that you said was off.
It wasn't completely off. It was missing a screw. It was hanging sideways. It takes two screws. If you remove one, it's going to rotate over sideways.
So when it was rotated over sideways, could you see kind of down back into where that overflow drain was?
Yeah, that's the point. That's where you enter the snake when you snake out a bathtub. You remove the overflow plate.
Okay.
So.
And you're not about to say excuse me, let me back up a little bit. Having one screw on an overflow plate, that's not a way that you would typically leave an apartment when you go to get it ready for a new tenant. Am I right in saying that?
No.
All right. With regards to when you're doing this repair, where is Adam Montgomery?
Right outside the bathroom door.
Okay. And are you guys talking at all during that time?
Not really. He's doing more pacing than talking. So,
More pacing.
yeah, he was just kind of waiting for us to finish.
In regards to that particular apartment, I'm going to grab that invoice back for you, sir. After this time period, were you ever called to go back there to do other sort of maintenance repairs?
I think I had to go back one more time to fix some lights on the ceiling. Yes. They were just popped off the ceiling. They were hanging by the wires.
Literally
Yeah.
off the ceiling.
Yeah. The wires weren't disconnected. I mean, a light isn't heavy. The lights we use are real light. They'll hang by the wires and still work, but they were hanging by the wires. So put them back up.
Any idea how those lights got pulled down? Excuse me. I'll withdraw the question and I'll rephrase. With regards to those lights, did Adam Montgomery tell you how they got pulled down?
He said he took them down because he thought there were cameras in them.
With regards to other electrical work, did you do any other kind of electrical work on that unit while he was residing there?
I had to replace the thermostat.
You had to replace the thermostat.
Correct.
Okay. Any other electrical repairs that you know?
No, that's it.
And let me ask, when you later on that particular apartment, when you do clean outs, could you describe for us what you do in the apartment for a clean out?
Throw everything in bags and bring it to the dump. Rip the carpets out and bring those to the dump.
Okay. Do you remember doing a clean out of this particular apartment after the Montgomerys left?
I do.
For the clean out that you said that you would rip different things out, just in general, correct?
Well, whatever's damaged and needs to be replaced.
Okay. What about appliances? Do you ever remove those?
I do.
Okay. And do you have any recollection whether you ever removed any appliances from that unit?
Yeah, we threw the fridge away.
Okay. All right. Mr. Clutie, those are all the questions I have for you. I appreciate your time today. I believe defense counsel may have a couple.
No questions.
Sir, you may step.
Alrighty. It's interesting that the defense didn't question him at all. This defense definitely seems a bit passive in terms of only asking a few questions if they do end up asking questions. We are going to finish up today with a driver. This lady is a driver / caretaker of sorts. So her job is to drive people around that don't have access to transportation. And as we know, with Adam and Kayla's history, they have driving issues. They have their car broken down most of the time. They've lived in their car, things like that. So at some point, this lady had driven around Kayla and her children.
Down.
Thank you.
By the name of Kayla Montgomery.
I have.
And have you ever driven a person by the name of Adam Montgomery?
Yes, I did.
Where did you give them rides to? And I'm sorry, what kind of rides did you give them? What services did you drive them to?
I drove them primarily to the methadone clinics on Market Street.
On Market Street?
That's correct.
When you first started driving them for trips to the methadone clinics on Market Street, where were you picking them up generally in the city? Excuse me.
December 14th, 2019, I began picking them up from Dubuque Street from their parents' house.
And later on, did you ever pick them up from the vicinity of 644 Union Street?
Yes, I picked them up from Union Street as well.
With regards to the two of them, would you drive both of them at the same time, one at a time, the entire family with children? How would you drive them?
I would drive the entire family, and they would go in and dose, and I would sing Baby Shark with Declan and Seamus.
And those were the two children that they had with them?
That's correct.
Okay. And did they have a child with them named Harmony?
No, they did not.
I'd like to ask you specifically about one particular incident in 2020 with regards to a ride that you gave Kayla Montgomery. And what I'd like to ask you about this is with regards to a conversation you may or may not have had then with Adam Montgomery, okay?
Mhm.
All right. You have to say yes or no. I'm
Yes.
sorry. It's how we record here.
Yes.
All right. Do you know the incident that I'm talking about?
I do believe
Right.
so
So
2021, right around March and spring. Well, hindsight is 2020. It was around 2021 that the incident happened.
well, then that's what I'd like to ask about. March of 2021. Thank you for correcting me. So in March of 2021, would you say, would you or would you not agree that this incident was not like this driving was not like other driving that you've done for them?
Absolutely, it was something I will never forget.
Okay.
Ma'am, I'm going to need you to raise your voice. It's a big room, and everybody here needs to be able to hear you.
Okay.
Thank you.
It was not like other rides.
Okay. I'd like to ask you, when you first did you see Kayla Montgomery on that day for this particular ride?
Yes, I did.
And without going into what Miss Montgomery said, when you saw her face, how did she appear to you?
Her left eye was badly bruised and starting to swell shut.
Did you drive her that day down to the methadone clinic?
I drove both of them that day.
And with regards to, pardon me, excuse me, with regards to that drive, had you driven Miss Montgomery the day before?
Yes, I had.
Did she have that black eye the day before?
No, she had not.
So on that day when you drove her down to the methadone clinic with the black eye, who else was in the car with you and Miss Montgomery?
Adam.
Adam. And by that you mean Adam Montgomery?
That's correct. Yes.
I'm going to show you this from Mark State's exhibit 1. You recognize who this person is?
Yes, that is Adam Montgomery.
And this is the other person that you drove in that car?
That's correct.
Did you potentially change on this ride?
I do not believe so. I think Kayla said she left them with a neighbor. Oh, okay.
I don't want to ask what Kayla said. So
Okay.
I appreciate that.
Okay, the children were not in the car with them that day.
Okay. So they were not with him that day. When you saw Kayla with the black eye and you were driving down to the methadone clinic and back, how was she moving in a car? Could you describe physically what you saw in terms of her movements?
She didn't move very much, and she didn't say very much because Adam was in the car.
Okay. At some point in time, did you pull out your cell phone? And can you
she had asked to use
hold on just a minute, Ms. Smith. I'm sorry. I can't ask you what she said to you.
No.
So I just want to talk a little bit about what happened in the car.
Okay.
Physical movements, okay?
Yes.
And I apologize. That's on me. I should ask more clarifying question or a more specific question. With regards to the drive to the methadone clinic,
Yes.
did anything occur in the car on the drive down to the methadone clinic?
No.
Okay. And then for the drive from the methadone clinic on Market Street back to Union Street.
Yes.
Let me ask you, the event that I want to ask you about, did that occur when you were back at Union Street?
Yes.
Okay. When this event occurred, where was Kayla?
In the front seat beside me.
Okay. And where was Adam at this point?
Walking away from the car.
Okay. And with regards to there with Kayla, what, if anything, did you try to give Kayla?
I tried to give her my phone.
Okay. What did you believe she was going to do with the phone?
She said, well, I can't do, she said,
No.
He wanted to call for help.
Okay. And with regards to that, how was she physically at the time? I know you've described the black eye already. How was she physically when you went to try to give her the phone?
She was shaky.
Where was Adam when you tried to give her the phone?
He was walking back towards the car, but...
And so at that point you said he was walking back towards the car?
I didn't see Adam there. I saw rage. I saw pure rage walking towards me.
What did Adam do as he... Were you in the driver's seat?
Yes.
And where was Kayla?
Beside me in the passenger seat.
And what did the defendant do?
He reached into the window of the car and twisted my phone out of my hand
and said, "You're not giving my wife that phone."
What did you say to him when he did that to you?
I looked at him and I said, "Adam, I love you. Please give me the phone back. I'm trying to help you guys."
What did he do then?
He then gave me the phone back and I was able to give it to Kayla.
Did he say anything else?
No.
So that you begged him for the phone back.
I begged him for the phone back. I did report that
Let me ask about that. You said you reported that.
to my boss, not the police. I reported that to my boss, and I told her that I didn't think I should be picking them up anymore, that I had been very frightened by what had happened. And thereafter, I carried pepper spray.
Thereafter, you started carrying pepper spray because of this.
Yes.
Can you just have a moment, please, Your Honor? Thank you, Aaron. I apologize, Mr. Frank. Just sometimes we need a minute. One thing I just want to clarify with you, and to make sure that I understand accurately.
Junior Gotti, if you would use the microphone and keep.
Sorry, Your Honor, I thought it was close enough.
Thank you.
One question that I would like to go ahead and ask you, and just trying to clarify, is I know that you testified a moment ago that this occurred in your memory, that this was back in March of 2021.
Yes.
And I want to ask you whether or not you are sure with regards to that particular date.
I am.
Okay. Do you feel that at all that, or excuse me, have you ever provided statements to others that had occurred in the spring of 2020 other than 2021?
I had to meditate on that. And I concurred with my boss. We have records.
You have records.
My boss at Pelican Transportation has records.
Okay, so let me just try to clarify. So when you say I had to meditate on that,
I asked my boss.
You asked your boss. Okay, all right. Meditation out loud. So you asked your boss about the date and when you asked to not have to drive them anymore. Am I understanding that correctly?
Correct.
Okay. And after doing that, you looked at some records?
Yes, my boss has all the records of when we picked them up and when we dropped them off.
And after speaking with your boss, now your memory is that this was in 2021 rather than 2020.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you, Ms. Smith. I don't have any further questions. I believe defense counsel may have a few.
Okay.
Hi, Ms. Smith.
Hi.
Are you able to hear me okay?
I can hear you fine. Yes.
I'm sorry about what happened.
Mm-hmm.
But this was March of 2021.
Yes.
No doubt in your mind about it.
That's correct.
When Adam took the phone, you told him that you loved him.
I did tell him that.
And he gave you the phone back.
He softened and he gave me the phone back.
Thank you so much, Rose.
Okay. Thank you.
Very briefly, Ms. Smith, you said that he softened.
He did. The anger in his face went away. But the rage that he had in his face and then that knee-jerk reaction that he had to it by snatching my phone out of my hand, it was very frightening.
I understand.
It was assault. Thank you. All right.
Nothing here, Judge.
You may step down.
Thank you.
Wow, you can tell that she is really affected by this occurrence. And As far as I'm aware, she really was just the driver for this. So it was interesting that her first reaction was to tell Adam that she loved him, to try to get some kind of more human reaction out of him instead of the rage-filled natural attack that he went into. So that's definitely really telling on her quick reaction to do that, but it's also telling to see that Adam actually responded to that, which I'm a little surprised by. But that probably goes into telling for, his lack of connection and things like that, especially from his past and alienating himself through drugs, which tends to happen as well. All right, we are going to end here with this driver. We will continue some more tomorrow. So have a fantastic rest of your day. Thank you so much for hanging out, and I'll see you then.